Rotate lid to unlock and lift away at an angle to avoid splashing of hot contents. People of the PRF, do not lift lid straight up.
Welcome, comrades, to the Art of Cinema. I am Colonel T, Minister of Propaganda of the People's Republic of F.
And I am your superior, your overlord, your glorious leader, General Secretary F. Colonel, I understand that we're up to number 7 on our list of the top 10 films of the 2000s.
That we are, sir. The film in question is called American Gangster.
American Gangster. Now there's a title that's an object lesson in redundancy.
2 words that each refer to the same thing, yes, sir. There's no one more likable in Hollywood than Denzel Washington, our hero in the film, or anti-hero, as the case may be. So for the first scene of the film, we see him pour gasoline on one of his underworld rivals and set him on fire. Denzel Washington lets his competitor burn alive for a few seconds, then shoots him dead. The scene establishes who Denzel Washington really is in the film so that we don't forget, because even as a murderous mob boss, we're going to be tempted to be on his side. In spite of ourselves, we're going to want to see him succeed.
I don't understand, Colonel. How would Denzel Washington burning his opponents alive make us like him less? Progress always comes at a cost in human lives.
That's a question the film will answer subtextually, sir.
When I get that feelin', subtextual healin'.
At the start of the story, it's 1968. Denzel Washington is the protege of Clarence Williams III. Clarence Williams III is the mob boss of Harlem. It's Thanksgiving, and we see Clarence Williams III and Denzel Washington open up the back of a truck and throw turkeys out into the crowd.
Oh, I hope they took those turkeys away from the bourgeoisie to give them to the workers.
Then, Clarence Williams III and Denzel Washington walk into an electronics store. Clarence Williams III laments the store's new business model. The store cuts out the middlemen, the suppliers, and allows customers to buy direct from the manufacturer. They're putting Americans out of work, says Clarence Williams III, but that's the way it is now. Then Clarence Williams III dies of a heart attack.
It appears that Clarence Williams III may have been educated in the principles of the politics of atrocity, Colonel. You see, in late-stage capitalist imperialist economies, large retail businesses have pronounced advantages over small shops because, as I have consistently taught, they can concentrate much more of the fruit of the workers' labor in one place to more efficiently exploit them. Macro-scale retailers drive out the so-called mom-and-pop operations. The small shopkeeper falls back regularly in the face of this onslaught, Colonel. But the question is, will Denzel Washington find a way to undo these systems of oppression?
Denzel Washington eventually takes over as the new Harlem mob boss after Clarence Williams III's death. And Denzel Washington remembers what Clarence Williams III said about the discount electronics store, its customers buying direct from the manufacturer. The heroin that Denzel Washington's crime syndicate has been selling is a heavily cut, diluted product. The corrupt New York police have a lot to do with this, in fact. When the cops seize a heroin supply, they further cut it down themselves and sell it back onto the street. So Denzel Washington wonders if he can turn his Harlem mafia into a discount store of sorts and allow his customers to buy direct from the manufacturer. Denzel Washington has a cousin in the military who's stationed in Vietnam. The Vietnam War is currently raging, sir.
Yes, the Vietnam War obtains, Colonel. The war in Vietnam endures. It persists at this time.
So Denzel Washington calls his cousin and makes a contact in Vietnam. He travels to Bangkok and has his contact take him out into the Vietnam jungle where the opium poppies are grown and from which heroin is derived. Denzel Washington meets with Rick Young, who's a colonel or general in Chiang Kai-shek's defeated army. Rick Young and his troops control the territory where the opium poppies are grown. Rick Young was also in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. He poisoned Harrison Ford's champagne.
What?
But Denzel Washington gets along much better with Rick Young. Rick Young agrees to sell pure heroin to Denzel Washington in large quantities.
Pure heroin eases the pain. But how is Denzel Washington going to get all that heroin into the United States undetected?
He uses soldiers returning to the U.S. from Vietnam, sir.
Okay.
So Denzel Washington rises to the top of Harlem organized crime now that he has a vastly superior product he can sell for half the price of the cut, diluted heroin previously available. Denzel Washington's heroin is called Blue Magic.
Blue Magic? I don't know. Is this some sort of Smurfs allegory?
It doesn't go through a series of middlemen such as suppliers and corrupt cops who cut it farther and raise the price at each stage. No one can compete with Denzel Washington's Blue Magic, and no one knows who's producing it. Denzel Washington brings his brothers and cousins up from North Carolina to be his associates in his Harlem drug empire. There's a brutal scene in which Denzel Washington kills Idris Elba so as to remove a competitor in his territory. Denzel Washington shoots him in the head in public in broad daylight.
It would seem that one does not fuck with Denzel Washington, Colonel.
No, sir. Denzel Washington would seem to have constructed and taken charge of the perfect drug empire in Harlem. He has a far superior product he can sell much cheaper than his competition. The people who work for him are all family he can trust, and law enforcement doesn't know it's him that's supplying Blue Magic to the streets.
So, Denzel Washington gets seduced by the comforts of bourgeois exploitation. What Denzel Washington should have done was to establish the dictatorship of the proletariat there in Harlem, because it turns out that workers need to be guided along the path of revolution by a brutal dictator at first, and then after a while, the utopia becomes spontaneous for them, and the brutal dictator can step down and, it's like,
yeah, right. Like you're ever stepping down.
Yeah, what bullshit. Anyway, perhaps Denzel Washington can be read as a cautionary tale for revolutionaries, because we've yet to see the fruits of his abandonment of the revolution here.
That's prescient of you, General Secretary, because not so fast, Denzel Washington. You weren't counting on Russell Crowe. Russell Crowe is one of the few good cops in the corrupt New York Police Department of the late 60s and early 70s. Early in the film, Russell Crowe manages to track down and seize $1 million of drug money. But Russell Crowe turns the money in at the police department, which means that most of the corrupt cops around him no longer trust him. No one will work with Russell Crowe after he pulls his Boy Scout stunt. It would have been easier for Russell Crowe if he'd just kept the money for himself. But Russell Crowe's boss is Ted Levine.
Oh, sure, Ted Levine. Ted Levine is also a diabolically transgendered serial killer who no one can stop except for Jodie Foster.
Yes, sir, with assistance from Anthony Hopkins. But in his other career as Russell Crowe's boss in the New York Police Department of the late 60s and early 70s, Ted Levine decides to put Russell Crowe in charge of a new task force to prosecute the war on drugs that Richard Nixon has inaugurated. Richard Nixon has commenced the war on drugs, sir.
Richard Nixon has embarked upon the war on drugs, Colonel.
You're correct as always, General Secretary.
Yes, I am.
So Russell Crowe leads the new drug task force. And just like with Denzel Washington, just like with the discount electronics store, the drug task force plans to deal directly with the manufacturer. They're not going to waste their time on street dealers and small-time suppliers. They're after the big fish, the organized crime bosses. But Russell Crowe and his war on drugs task force don't know who's distributing the Blue Magic heroin.
It kind of reminds me of when the Americans send special forces squads to take me down. Let's hope things go better for Russell Crowe and his boys than it did for those American troops, am I right? This guy knows what I mean.
Meanwhile, Denzel Washington is having a hard time maintaining the airtight, secretive, efficient organization he's established. His brothers and cousins, hired to be his lieutenants, start flashing their money and wearing expensive suits. They start getting sloppy. Denzel Washington meets and marries Limari Nadal, a Puerto Rican beauty pageant winner. One night, they're getting dressed up to attend the fight of the century between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. Limari Nadal gives Denzel Washington a gift. It's an expensive fur overcoat and hat. This is not in keeping with Denzel Washington's strategy of keeping a low profile, but in gratitude to his wife, he wears it to the fight. Russell Crowe is there at the fight taking pictures, trying to identify organized crime leaders. He notices Denzel Washington in his fine clothes, with better seats than the Italian mafia bosses he knows of. At this point, Russell Crowe doesn't even know who Denzel Washington is, but it's how Russell Crowe gets wise to Denzel Washington and starts investigating him. Eventually, one of Denzel Washington's cousins and underlords, high on heroin, shoots his girlfriend while the police are doing surveillance on him. Russell Crowe and his War on Drugs task force are able to force the cousin to wear a wire. They learn about the next shipment of heroin that's coming into New York to be sold as Blue Magic. It's been hidden inside the walls of the caskets in which dead U.S. servicemen have been brought back to America for burial. It's a wrenching, terribly conflicting scene when Russell Crowe and his team inspect these caskets looking for the heroin. heroin. They're eventually able to connect the shipment to Denzel Washington, whose time as Harlem's crime boss is over.
It's the timeless story of how crime doesn't pay, Colonel. And that's another way of saying that capitalism doesn't pay. Now, if Denzel Washington had taken the Blue Magic Heroin from the bourgeoisie and then had the bourgeoisie executed and then distributed their Blue Magic Heroin equally amongst the workers, that would have been a just and righteous story here in the American Gangster film. And I would have expected Denzel Washington then to have gone on a brutal reign of terror in Harlem, purging Harlem of its counterrevolutionaries and conducting oppressive propaganda campaigns to keep the workers and soldiers of Harlem marching in rank and file along the road to revolution. But instead, our hero Denzel Washington was corrupted by the capitalist system, and now I expect he'll be headed to the slammer, Colonel.
Denzel Washington's going to be checking into the Gray Bar Hotel, yes, sir.
Ah, yes. Denzel Washington has a one-way ticket to the big house.
There's a great scene where Russell Crowe arrests Denzel Washington as he's walking out of church with his mother. Then the last major scene of the film is of Russell Crowe negotiating with Denzel Washington over reducing his sentence. It's another good one. Denzel Washington keeps calling Russell Crowe my man, something he says a lot in American Gangster. But Denzel Washington is able to negotiate a lower sentencing by working with Russell Crowe to identify many of the corrupt New York City cops who got rich participating in the drug trade. Josh Brolin is the avatar for these corrupt cops in the film. Josh Brolin's career was rejuvenated by this role, sir, and by his leading role in No Country for Old Men. So instead of getting a life sentence, Denzel Washington does 15 years in prison from 1976 to 1991. In the last scene of the film, Denzel Washington is released from prison. He walks out of the gate alone into an America he doesn't recognize as we hear rap by Public Enemy.
Get up, get down, 911 is a joke in your town. Colonel, explain to the workers and soldiers at home why the Ministry of Propaganda of the People's Republic of F finds American Gangster to be an acceptable vehicle for Marxist-Leninist F-ist ideology.
Yes, sir. American Gangster is a very good organized crime story and a profile of the U.S. of the late 60s and early 70s. That's an important era in the history of the degeneration and collapse of their capitalist imperialist fraudulency. It's well acted by the cast generally, but in particular, it's got Denzel Washington in our favorite of his roles. Denzel Washington is fantastic in American Gangster.
Denzel Washington is a worker in American Gangster. A worker who's so successful, he rises to the ranks of the bourgeoisie. But the film does not correctly portray the proletariat. Denzel Washington is a strong-armed man, a brawler or a roughneck, as it were. His fellow workers are characterized as delinquents or addicts. This is, to be sure, a fraudulent depiction of the socio-economic class in which one has no enemies. But most tragically, American Gangster fails to transform Denzel Washington into a revolutionary, despite having laid an ample foundation at the start upon which he could have built a utopia. Neither does American Gangster offer us any character who exerts a profound revolutionary influence upon Denzel Washington. The closest it comes is Clarence Williams III, but Clarence Williams III only inspires Denzel Washington to a more efficient exploitation of the working class of Harlem. In the end, American Gangster leaves the Americans thirsting for the glorious leadership that I alone can provide for the People's Republic of F. And if even Denzel Washington can't provide it for the Americans, it only further demonstrates the urgent need for ideological and military conquest of the United States by our noble and selfless revolutionary operatives.
Workers and soldiers of the People's Republic of F, American Gangster is number 7 on our list of the 10 best movies of the 2000s. This has been The Art of Cinema with our glorious leader, General Secretary F. Let us maintain vigilance against the ever-looming threat of an American invasion. You are required to report any non-participation or dissent amongst your comrades. Don't forget to tune into The Art of Cinema again next time to discover which film ranks at number 6 on our list of the top 10 films of the 2000s in your next mandatory re-education session.